good morning, everybody. My name's Tamsin Koronka. I introduced myself yesterday. I'm a project manager for e-learning, and I've been doing this for many years. But I had the great privilege of coming out to Lagos to teach and train for a week, a team of people, to show over the course of a week how we would create e-learning titles and also how to project manage them. What I'm doing this morning is just going to take you through the project managing side of it. And I think tomorrow, Licha, it will be taking you through with Emily, the actual how you create the e-learning. So this is a very top level, broad look at what is involved in project managing a course of e-learning. And the first thing, can you all see that screen, or do I need to move anything up? Can you read it properly?
Maybe can you just yes.
Do I have to go
maybe if you,
or something?
No, I think if you just take the mouse away from the box, it will disappear, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Does that get better? Okay, so a production team has to be set up at the beginning of every project, and that involves these key people in the team. The first one is the project manager, and they oversee the whole project from beginning to end. They're really the only person who is with the project right from the beginning, right to the end. Other people dip in and dip out of a project. So these individuals need to be organized, and they need to be able to give their full attention to this project. They oversee the budget, they create a project plan, and they liaise with the people who we call clinical leads or subject matter experts, SMEs. And they basically operate like a conductor in an orchestra and pull everything together. The next person that would be in a team comes from outside, really. They're the clinical leads, the people who have the content and the knowledge, the specialist knowledge for the course, for the particular piece of training. So those people will differ depending on what the subject is. So if it's about maternity, it might be one specialist. If it's about orthopedics or anything like that, it will be a different specialist. Then we have a learning consultant, and that person is somebody who understands e-learning and understands how the course will be able to be designed to give the greatest knowledge to the people taking the course. And they'll have an understanding of Moodle and also of how things can be presented on a screen to maximize learning. Sometimes in a production team, the learning consultant can be the same person as the learning designer, but in a big team, you'll have two separate people. So what we tend to have in the courses that I run is we have a learning consultant who designs the course to begin with, and then we pass over to a learning designer who actually writes the script, so that a Moodle builder, somebody like Licha, could take that script and create each screen of the course. So the Moodle builder is the person who actually puts everything onto the platform, the Moodle platform that we're using to display screens. They also create the activities, the feedback screens, they add video. So they're very, very key to everything that gets put on the screen. And you heard yesterday from Sabrina. She's the equivalent of a graphic designer in our everything that is to do with images that you might think is not that important is a tester, because these courses have to be checked on mobile phones to see that they work properly. They have to be checked on desktops, and they have to be checked for accuracy and for proofreading, and to make sure that there are no software bugs anywhere in the course. So those are the main people that we look at. And the thing that This is where you gather all those people that I've just mentioned, and you have them in one room, ideally. If you've got restrictions, communication restrictions, travel restrictions, or indeed COVID restrictions, as we do at the moment, you can do this remotely through any technology like this, but it is always a very good idea to try and meet face to face if possible. And at that meeting, you try and map out a schedule with dates of where you think things will happen. There might be people's holidays coming up, other people might have other commitments. So you all around the table decide how the plan is going to run. We also, as a project manager, you need to find out the best way to communicate with your team. Some people communicate through WhatsApp, other people use emails all the time, or Skype we often use. So you need to get those details for everybody and make sure that everybody can communicate with everybody else very freely, because if that is difficult, then your project falls apart. Another thing in those project meetings at the beginning is we try and identify the risks. So there might be risks coming up because the content isn't easily available, or there may be risks from, again, COVID might cause risks to a project. But you always have to identify those risks at the beginning of a project and try and mitigate them in some way. And finally, you sit down and decide with a representative from the graphics team, from the building side, the Moodle side, and from the learning side, as well as from the clinical perspective. You design your course and look at learning objectives and who you want to teach. So the output of that meeting is that you can start your project. The first person that you need to engage with is the SME, the subject matter expert, because if you don't have the content right, what you're creating is make sure that all the content that you have is validated and checked. This is really important for medical content, but it's important for whatever you're teaching. You have to make sure that it is accurate, because the potential for it to be wrong is huge. You can affect many people's lives if you get it wrong. And the other thing that's really important with the subject matter experts is that they are often doing this work as part of their main role, their main job. So they might be a chief nurse, or they might be the head of an organization. They're really skilled people and their knowledge is really valuable, but it means that they're very busy and they can't often give their time to creating training like this. So what we try and do as project managers is to give them very specific review dates so that they know when they're going to be needed and they can focus in a short, succinct period of time to give us their feedback. And so those are the aspects that we want to get in place right at the beginning with the project plan. You're able to isolate that, I'm going to need this chief nurse to look over all this content on the 2nd of November, and it will take them a day, and they can book that in their diaries. So that's why we try and engage with the SMEs very early. This is just, you won't be able to see it, I shouldn't think in detail. It's just the idea of creating a draft project plan. So down the side, the first sort of columns of the spreadsheet, you would have each of the phases of the project. So the kickoff meeting, designing a document, design document, then the SME reviewing the document. Each of those tasks has a duration. It could be a day, it could be 5 days if it's to review something. And then in the next column, we have the start date and finish date. And we have then in the far column, you'll see the people's resource names. So you'll have an SME, a learning designer, a tester. And Then if you're doing a simple project plan, not using something like Microsoft Project, but you use what I've got here, which is Excel, you can just block out a day or a week according to, in a sort of bar, according to when people will be needed. And you distribute this draft project plan to everybody in the course, in the team, so that they can check that they're available and that they can commit to those deadlines. And only when they've committed to them do you then create a final project plan that you distribute to everybody. So in the slides, there is a draft plan link as well to an Excel document, but you can also look up Microsoft Project, or I've used other free software that gives you more of a Gantt chart look to it. But the project plan sort of, it gives the map for how the course is going to run. Production of a whole project, these are the stages that you have. So we start with the design phase, which you design and scope the whole content. You then create a little mini version of the project called a prototype, and that's created in Moodle. It would just show one example of how every screen might work. So you might have a quiz, you might have a video screen, you might have some feedback on a screen, and all those will be just shown, just one example of each in a prototype. And then you would also, from that, create a script, which is a Word document that the production team can then follow to create the course exactly as it's been designed. When those are all signed off by the SME, you then enter production. So between design and production, you have a review stage. And then when you enter production, you start with an alpha build, create it, then get it reviewed by the SME. Then you look at a beta phase, get it reviewed, and create a gold phase, which is your final delivery. So at each of those three stages, we have a review cycle, we call it. And that's critical, not only because it can check quality as you go, but you might see that when you've actually got something in a build, it doesn't look quite the way you thought it should. And so you need to rethink some screens, and that's all part of the process. That's the feedback process. So here it is again. We've got a content scope in the first section. We write the scripts, we review, we go to alpha, we review, beta, and we review. Every review, I think I heard mentioned yesterday that this is one of the tools that we use. We use Google Sheets, which is just an online version of an Excel spreadsheet. But it does mean that everybody can look at the document at the same time. It's a live document. So it's really useful to have everybody record their feedback into a Google Sheet. And this acts as the guide for everybody to make the changes. And what we like to do is to create a color scheme for everybody so that they can know what color they are and what color they're looking out for on the tracker. And this is what a typical Google tracker will look like. We have the location in the first column. So that would say that screen number 2 of 2 has some issue with it. And then whatever the description of the issue is, whatever the SME thought was wrong, or in fact, anybody on the project team who's reviewing it might also be able to comment in a Google tracker. And that description of the issue is written next. And then the column next door to that is what you would like to be changed on that screen. And that's really important, that it's very, very accurate. It says exactly what you want, because as Leecha will tell you, every time she makes an amend, what she does is to copy and paste whatever is in that screen pretty much and puts it directly into the build. So that needs to be really accurate. And next door to it, you'll see it's got a yellow color with builder, and that means that that would be for the attention of somebody like Leecha, the builder. If it's a different color and it's got learning consultant, then that's going to be the person who designed the course. And it might be that we're asking to go back to the designer and say, this screen really doesn't work, could you rethink it? And then we have some notes and questions. And then when it's fixed, you mark your name down. Finally, every single comment that needs to be checked is changed. So that's the production process. There's a separate side to project managing that sort of steps outside the daily running of a project, and it's to do with budgeting. Budgeting comes in different forms, but really what you're doing as a project manager is balancing the resources that you have, which are the people. Sometimes it's also the cost of images or buying software or creating a video, but mostly it's staff costs and day costs. You're balancing that with the cost of time and the cost of quality. So everything that you look in your budget, you need to go down and say, have I got the money and the resources and everything in place to facilitate a good quality product that is going to be delivered on time? And all these factors come into play when you're budgeting. It's a very particular skill, and it's not something that everybody will have. And it's not always the project manager's role to pay attention to it. Sometimes they have a different department that pays attention to it, but it is worth mentioning that that's something a project manager often needs to be aware of. And another element for the project manager is the risk management. With every project, you'll find that there are mistakes and issues, and bugs happen and people get ill. And as you find in Nigeria quite a lot, connections go down, Wi-Fi connections go down, all sorts of issues can happen, and that's quite normal and to be expected. And in fact, as a project manager, it's something you often really like. You like the fact that there are unexpected things that happen that you have to deal with. And the key to those is that you need to identify them early, because as long as you're aware of things, then everything will be all right in the end. If you don't know what's going on, everything can fall apart. So the first thing is early identification. And the next thing is to evaluate the extent of the problem, whether it's as simple as some power cuts, or whether it's the fact that somebody's ill, or it might be the fact that there's a massive software bug in one of the courses and you can't solve it. You need to know the extent of the problem. And once you've evaluated the extent of the problem, you must communicate it as quickly as possible to everybody. You communicate it firstly to your project team to assess the nature of it and how bad it's going to get. You need to understand how bad it's going to get. And at that point, you then decide how much you're going to tell the either the client or the clinical leads, because you don't need to alarm anybody. You need to have an action plan in place, but you need to communicate to everybody how you're going to deal with those problems. And then I would say one of the main things you need to be able to do as a project manager is remain calm in all these inevitable things that happen as a project goes through. So managing an e-learning project is no different from managing the construction of a building or anything. Indeed, it's just the same as project managing anything else. You need to identify things early, evaluate them, communicate them, and stay calm. And I think we're coming to the end of... Oh no, we've got weekly status report. Part of communicating is that you have a nice succinct way of talking to everybody on the team, but especially the very busy people like the subject matter experts who need just a snapshot each week of how the project is going. And this weekly status report is a really nice way of doing it. And it has something in it called a RAG status. And a RAG status means red, amber, green. And this is what red, amber, green is in project managing terms. If something's going wrong and is really needs to take action now, you color your red, amber, green, your RAG status chart with a little red symbol. And then you have to expand on that and say what it is that you are going to do about it and what the problem is and what action you're going to take. If you just are flagging something, really, you're just saying to your team, this is a problem and I can see it might be a problem if we don't take notice of it. It's an amber alert and you color it orange. And if everything's on track and you're producing everything on budget to the right schedule and the quality is good, then you color it green and all's good. So just to go back to this screen, you'll see that you have these little bars colored red, amber or green, and that's budget or design, scope or quality. So you color each one of these a different color depending on whether they are on track or not. And finally, I think this is my last slide. Running an e-learning project can be stressful. So I've just said that. You can get bugs and software and glitches and content, but you need to communicate to everyone. Forewarned is forearmed. Remember to be calm, positive, and practical. It's about leading your team by giving them clear direction to navigate through the life of a project to its successful delivery. And then I think we'll probably take some questions before we might look at doing an exercise. Lita, I'm not quite sure how we want to go about doing the exercise, but should I take some questions first?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Tamsin.
Does anybody have any questions on that?
There is a question in the chat, Tamsin, from Aminu.
Now how do I get to that?
So on the top
COVID
part
has
of the
taken the
screen,
whole
there is a-
world unawares. How could project managers hook onto project plans in cases of emergencies like COVID?
Read it again for me, please.
Okay. COVID has taken the whole world unawares. How could project managers hook onto project plans in cases of emergencies like COVID? So it's how do you respond if something unexpected comes along like COVID? How would you deal with a crisis like that? Through project
Yes,
planning?
so that has actually happened and is happening. I think when you start a project right at the beginning, if you have the luxury of knowing now that we are dealing with COVID, it's one of the main things that you need to sort out right at the beginning of your project. And what I've done on projects I've been working on is have somebody to shadow everybody in the team. So I make sure that I communicate what the graphic artist is doing to at least 2 people. I have somebody to shadow me so that if I go down with COVID, the project can be picked up by somebody else. I make sure that those weekly status reports are circulated to everybody so that everybody can cover everybody else to some degree. So the projects that Lita and I are working on now, we can all sort of chip in and help each other out if anybody is feeling unwell or some deadlines change because of something to do with a sudden illness. So I think that is where project planning comes into its own, because you are able to resource the project, try and get a little bit more
We've lost you, Tamsin.
extra resources if you need,
We missed a
and
few words
plan
there,
ahead.
Tamsin,
So
sorry.
maybe where did I get to? But I think it's
just-
all about planning ahead.
Great.
So it's about shadowing people in the project team and creating more resource to cover in the event of something like COVID.
Would you build in that into
Does that answer
timelines? Would you build some contingency
Yeah.
to timelines?
Yes, definitely. So what I've tended to do is to add more time for the review periods so that we can sort of expand if we need to. You can also add more time to a project plan for amending things. So if I had a day to make changes, now that we think that there might be some issues, I might put 2 days into the plan. It depends whether the deadline of the project is the most important or not. But project planning, I'm not aware of it. So it's now something you should definitely factor into your project plans.
That's great, Tamsin. Thank you very much. Are there any more questions? Obviously this is really the lead into our session tomorrow on developing e-learning. But of course, what Tamsin's been telling us about could very much apply to any kind of project and managing different members of a team. But it's especially important for e-learning projects because they're complicated and there are many different technical specialisms involved in that. So that's the relevance of it is mainly as a lead-in to tomorrow, but you could equally apply some of those project management approaches to management of the website or of any large project. So any questions from the group?
Okay, well, I don't know if it's I'll just share my screen again. We thought that we might tomorrow you will be creating a course, a very sort of small snapshot of a course useful to look at this morning is just the skills that you would need around a production team. And when I was in Nigeria in February, we did this on a slightly larger scale in that everybody who was a student at that training course took on one role of the production team for the week. So somebody was the graphic designer and we had mini teams of 5 people in each group. And there was one person who was more appropriate to be a project manager, somebody else who might like to do more of the learning design and the writing, somebody else who was quite methodical, who wanted to be a tester, and somebody who was a clinical expert in their field of study. So it's not something that I think you need to necessarily do at the moment, but is this skill set sharing the screen or is it a different tab and I need to start sharing again? Share this tab instead, I think is what I need to say. Is this showing now?
Yes, thank you.
So I wrote this out a little while ago with the help of team members to try and find specific people for each role. So there's a skill set for an authoring tool builder, and the link is in the slides. And you'll see that there's an attention to detail, things like that for them. And then there's a skill set for a project manager. They need leadership skills, need to be a good communicator, good at problem solving, knowledge of budgets, and to keep calm under pressure. So you'll know amongst yourselves and about yourself as to whether you would suit that role or not. Obviously with some creativity and understanding of software packages, and the skill set and requirements for a learning designer we also have the tester, which is a very specific mindset for a tester. They need to be really, really methodical and almost, we had one tester on one of our projects who was obsessive compulsive disorder, who was actually brilliant at being a tester because they loved looking for little tiny mistakes in things. So there are different types of people who make very good different sorts of people on a team. And the subject matter expert needs to be very, very knowledgeable in their content. So that's just something to think about, really. It's not necessarily something to do right now, but something to bear in mind. So I think that probably concludes to the team, but I hope it going forwards and with your work tomorrow.
Thank you, Tamsin.
Thank you very much, Tamsin.